If you haven't watched Dragon Ball Z in a long time and you decided to watch Dragon Ball Super without refreshing your memory of the previous series, you probably found yourself a bit confused. Not only are there a lot of new elements introduced in Dragon Ball Super, but it also retconned, changed, or otherwise reconfigured a lot of aspects of the franchise. Some of these changes include character motivation shifts, new roles for certain characters, lots of new character designs, and a ton of rewrites to establish rules of the universe. If you don't think a lot's changed from the days of Dragon Ball Z, let us prove you wrong as we go through everything that Dragon Ball Super changed about the franchise. Let's start off with the big one, Vegeta's pride. Specifically, we're talking about Vegeta's desire to surpass Kakarot because of his Saiyan pride, which has been weirdly restored despite how the Buu saga ended. For those who don't remember, while Goku was facing off against Kid Buu, Vegeta watched in admiration, reminiscing about his relationship with Goku and how they have shaped each other. During that internal monologue, Vegeta finally admitted that Goku was better than him, not just because he was stronger, but because he continued to get stronger for himself, not to stand over others. And yet in Dragon Ball Super, Vegeta seems to have dropped this sentiment. And while he hasn't returned to his Cell Saga mentality, he still seeks to get stronger than Goku, despite his Buu Saga monologue. Obviously, this change was made to give Vegeta a more prominent role in Dragon Ball Super, but it came at the cost of character growth. Another major change that fans of Dragon Ball may have noticed is that Goku seems to be a lot dumber than he used to be. More specifically, Goku seems to be as aloof and lacking in social grace as he was when he was a kid. Our theory as to why this is in Dragon Ball Super is that the series made great attempts to return some of the more silly elements of the original Dragon Ball series, making Super a lot more comedic than its predecessor. Because of this, a source of comic relief in the original Dragon Ball, Goku's stupidity, was amplified in Super, where it had been downplayed a bit in Z. Some examples of this include when Goku didn't know what kissing was, when he couldn't parse what Krillin was trying to tell him about why he wanted to fight again, and when he said straight up mean things to Bulma after accidentally teleporting into her bedroom. One major visual change that Dragon Ball Super made to a Dragon Ball character was Trunks' new hair color. Trunks' hair color on Dragon Ball Z was originally purple, but in Super, when the character came back, it was the same shade of blue as his mother. Though we never got an in-story reason for this, there is sort of a behind-the-scenes explanation for it. See, in the original manga, Bulma was supposed to have purple hair, but the people behind the character's anime appearance weren't aware of this and gave her blue hair in Dragon Ball. Bulma retained this hair color all throughout the franchise, but when her son from the future first appeared, he had purple hair, which is technically the correct color. However, when it came time for Dragon Ball Super, his hair was changed to match Bulma's, so even if they had the wrong hair color, they would still match. This next one isn't something that's entirely confirmed, but is still worth mentioning. The topic we're referring to is the epilogue of Dragon Ball Z, which takes place after the events of Super, but may not be canon anymore. The reason we say this is because Dragon Ball Super has added a lot to the lore of the franchise, and it seems weird the events of the series didn't affect the future. Again, this isn't entirely confirmed, but when you take into account things like Vegeta once again dropping his desire to surpass Goku, Pan being born before Bulla, and no mention of Beerus, Whis, or the multiverse, it's hard to say that the epilogue of DBZ is canon. It may very well still be a part of the canon timeline, but if we had to make a call, we'd say Dragon Ball Super retconned the ending of Dragon Ball Z. Next up, let's talk about something that wasn't quite a change as much as it was an expansion of Dragon Ball lore, how the old Kai got sealed away into the Z-Sword. Remember back in the Buu Saga when Gohan was training under the Supreme Kai with the Z-Sword and he and Goku accidentally broke it, releasing the old Kai? Well, in Dragon Ball Super, we learned that it was none other than Lord Beerus who sealed the old Kai away in that sword, a fact that was revealed in early episodes of the Beerus Saga of Super. Like we said, this wasn't so much a retcon or a change to the canon, just an expansion of the story, since the old Kai never stated specifically who it was that sealed him away. With this reveal, we also learned that the reason for the whole sealing debacle was because Beerus found the old Kai annoying. Sounds like Beerus. Another Beerus-related retcon that Dragon Ball Super introduced was his involvement with Saiyans because he didn't want any of them rising up to defeat him. And while this is still technically true, the order to destroy the planet and its inhabitants was also partially Beerus' idea. Apparently, Lord Beerus ordered Frieza to destroy the Saiyans, or at least he approved of Frieza's plan to do so. meaning he had a hand in the death of the Saiyan race. The supposed reason for Beerus' involvement was because the Saiyans were a dangerous people, and his role as a destroyer god is to rid the universe of such aliens. Regardless, this was a major lore bombshell that changed a lot about the history of the franchise, standing as one of the most significant examples of Dragon Ball Super changing the mythos of Dragon Ball Z. Goku's origin was another thing that Dragon Ball Super changed, specifically Dragon Ball Super Broly. See, prior to Broly's retcon of certain events, Goku's origin was only depicted in flashbacks alongside Master Roshi's description of how Grandpa Gohan found Goku, and Bardock, the father of Goku. It was never clear if either of these were the true origin of the hero, but Dragon Ball Super Broly pretty much cleared it up. Turns out Goku wasn't actually sent to Earth to conquer it, but was instead sent away by his parents to survive the planet's impending destruction, Superman style. Additionally, Goku was wearing Saiyan armor when he was sent away, something that wasn't originally depicted in Dragon Ball. On top of all this, we saw more of Bardock's final days and how he came to the decision to save his son from Frieza's destruction, these now canon events being slightly different from the previous interpretation of the character. This next one is a bit of a technicality since the Pilaf gang didn't appear at all in Dragon Ball Z, but we're gonna count it anyway. The change we're talking about is, of course, the fact that the Pilaf gang are now children in Dragon Ball Super. In fact, their return is another thing that Dragon Ball Super changed from Z, since they disappeared after Dragon Ball. However, when they returned, they were no longer adults and had not aged at all, instead appearing as children thanks to a Dragon Ball wish for youth that went just a bit too far. The result was that the Pilaf gang were no longer recognized by Goku and Bulma, the latter actually welcoming them into her home as lab assistants and the like. It's a pretty strange change, not just because bringing back the Pilaf gang was unexpected, but also because making them kids is a pretty out there idea. Before Dragon Ball Super adapted their plots into sagas, Battle of Gods and Resurrection F were under the Dragon Ball Z moniker, meaning they were part of DBZ, marketed as being the first canon films in the franchise before eventually being erased and replaced with rehashed versions in Dragon Ball Super. This is one of the major changes that Dragon Ball Super made to Dragon Ball Z, the events of these two films which were mostly duplicated but had a lot of things added to them in order for their stories to be stretched out into full sagas. Some of these changes include a few introductory episodes of what the characters had been up to as Beerus awakens, more time spent at Bulma's party, which was on a boat in Super for some reason, and some minor reshuffling of events that made the plots work better for a full series rather than just one film. Following the two sagas that were retellings of Battle of Gods and Resurrection F, we got the first Dragon Ball Super original saga, the Universe 6 saga, which brought with it a major change to the world of Dragon Ball. The change in question was the introduction of the multiverse. Previously, there was nothing suggesting the existence of alternate universes in Dragon Ball. Sure, there was alternate timelines created by future Trunks' time traveling, but it wasn't until Super that a full multiverse was introduced. With this information, we also learned that universes tend to have twin universes that act as mirror images of sorts. Regardless, adding alternate universes was one of the biggest changes that Super made to the lore of Dragon Ball, one that gave us a pretty freaking awesome final arc of the series thanks to the Tournament of Power. Next up, let's talk about fusion, specifically Potara fusion. See, way back in the Buu saga, Goku and Vegeta were forced to rely on Potara fusion to defeat Buu, a choice that could potentially keep them fused forever, according to the old Kai. Despite this, Vegeta and Goku somehow split apart after being absorbed by Buu. No one was ever really sure of the reasoning behind it, some claiming it was due to the magical nature of Buu's body, while others said that Potara don't work the same with mortals as they do with Kai. In Super, we learned that the latter was the case, as the Supreme Kais revealed that permanent fusion only occurs when two Kais wear the Potara, and when mortals fuse, it only lasts an hour. This was why Goku and Vegeta unfused after being absorbed by Buu, and likely the reason why fused Zamasu's fusion ended up being unstable. Next up on the list of changes made by Dragon Ball Super is the most recent addition to the series, Dragon Ball Super Broly. Specifically, we're talking about how this film officially added Broly to the canon of the franchise. Despite 3 films, lots of video game appearances, and even a role in a temporary 4D attraction at Universal Studios Japan, Broly was still a movie-only character, and thus not part of the main canon of Dragon Ball. All that changed with Dragon Ball Super Broly, which provided a new backstory and rebooted character elements for Broly. With this film, Broly, his survival of Planet Vegeta's destruction, and his legendary power all became part of the official Dragon Ball universe, a major change from Dragon Ball Z where he was only a movie villain. Additionally, most elements aside from these were reworked and changed, the film also adding some new details about the history of the Saiyans. Though he eventually played a major role in the latter half of the series, Gohan seemed to take a very minor role in Dragon Ball Super, a drastic difference from Dragon Ball Z, where he had a major role in every saga. This change doesn't really have a reason behind it save for fan service, since Goku and Vegeta took center stage in Super. Regardless of the reason, it was made very clear that Gohan had become a side character in the early sagas of Super, since he had started wearing sweater vests and became something of a skinny wimp of power, but the first parts of Super clearly decided to bench Gohan, a major role change for a character that had been so prominent in DBZ. Seriously, the guy defeated Cell and kicked Boo's butt. Why wasn't he more involved? Gohan wasn't the only character who got what some might call nerfed, since Videl was pretty different from how she was in Dragon Ball Z. In Z, Videl was a fiery punk rock badass who fought crime and wanted to show up her bolsterous father. Videl didn't take crap from anybody, and this attitude helped her strong-arm her way into getting flying lessons from Gohan. However, after she and Gohan got married, Videl was much less like her badass teenage self and started to take on a more passive role, standing in the background and only really showing her past self when dealing with Barry Khan. There's nothing really wrong with this character shift, and it makes some sense seeing as all of her fire was the result of wanting to take Mr. Satan down a peg, which the Buu saga ended up doing, but it was still a major change between Dragon Ball Z and Super. Speaking of Videl, her bombastic father went through a major change in Dragon Ball Super. We are, of course, referring to Mr. Satan's appearance, which is much less World Martial Arts champion looking than it used to be. In Dragon Ball Z, both during the Cell Saga and the Buu Saga, Mr. Satan seemed to be in pretty good shape. Sure, he wasn't a superhuman martial artist, but he still had some muscles. However, by the time of Dragon Ball Super, those muscles seemed to have atrophied, replaced by a more slimmed-down frame. The most likely reason for this is because of Buu, who defeats all of Mr. Satan's camp. In other words, Mr. Satan doesn't really have a reason to keep up his training, which explains his major appearance change in Dragon Ball Super. For the most part, Dragon Ball Super has done a good job of answering the question of what do the Z fighters do for a living, which is something that Dragon Ball Z seemed to gloss right over most of the time. The reason we bring this up is to talk about a major change that Dragon Ball Super brought to Krillin, his new job as a police officer, prior to source of income. But that all changed in Dragon Ball Super when Krillin was shown stopping criminals as a cop. It makes a lot of sense. Krillin is pretty much the strongest human, and since he's not always crucial to the big fights, he found a way to use his strength to still protect people. The job marking Ace of Dragon Ball Z. Known as Divine Ki or Godly Ki, this energy was described to be much more powerful and potent than regular Ki. Additionally, only gods had access to it. Because of all this, Beerus stood as one of the most powerful opponents the franchise had ever seen, his godly ki not only making him much stronger, it also made him impossible to track, since Divine Ki cannot be sensed by mortals. This part of godly ki actually retconned a major part of Dragon Ball Z. Characters like King Kai and Supreme Kai Shin also have Divine Ki, though this wasn't known until Dragon Ball Super, retconning their energy in a way that leaves us with a lot of questions and concerns about plot holes and lore. If you've seen Dragon Ball Super Broly, you'll recall a scene where things got a little weird. We are of course referring to when Gogeta and Broly's battle literally broke reality. This wasn't the first time something like this happened either, since a similar occurrence unfolded when Super Saiyan God Goku fought Beerus. With so much strength and power clashing, their shockwaves cracked the universe. This concept was something introduced in Dragon Ball Super and stands as a major change to the universe, since it wasn't present in Dragon Ball Z. We're likely to see more of this too, since Goku and Vegeta only get stronger and stronger, and with Broly in the main canon of the series, his power could cause another break in reality. Then again, we may never see this kind of thing again, but it still stands as a major change that Dragon Ball Super brought to the franchise. Speaking of Dragon Ball Super Broly, you might also recall that it had a few background details that changed quite a bit about the history of the Dragon Ball universe. Specifically, we're talking about how the film revealed that there were more Saiyans who survived the destruction of planet Vegeta. On top of Broly and his father Paragus surviving the destruction of their home by way of being off-planet, we know that there were 2 other Saiyans who survived the same way. These 2 nameless Saiyans were also shown alongside Vegeta and Raditz after they heard of their planet's destruction. We don't know much about these Saiyans, or how they eventually ended up perishing since they weren't present in the Saiyan saga. But the fact that there were other Saiyan survivors is a huge deal, since we thought there were only a few Saiyans remaining, and maybe we'll learn more about them in future installments of the franchise. Last and certainly not least, we have another retcon that came with Dragon Ball Super, Vegeta's history with Beerus. Prior to Dragon Ball Super, Vegeta had never mentioned knowing a God of Destruction. Heck, he didn't even mention that he knew what a God of Destruction was. The weird thing about this is that Vegeta believed himself to be the strongest warrior in the universe after Frieza's defeat, knowing that there was no one else who could be his equal, a notion that directly contradicts the fact that he met Beerus as a kid. It's an easily forgettable and smoothed over detail, but it changes a few things established in Dragon Ball Z. And Beerus' introduction in general is also a major retcon, since he's tied to the Supreme Kai and King Kai, who never mentioned him before he appeared in Dragon Ball Super, despite him being a major part of the universe. So there you have it, all the changes that Dragon Ball Super made to the franchise. Personally, we like some of these changes, especially how Broly was brought into the main canon. Which change was your favorite? What about your least favorite? Let us know down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more Dragon Ball videos.